Well, as I mentioned, my parents were both biologists.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I didn't major in any of the sciences, exposed to a lot of science. And my parents were very concerned about DDT before Rachel Carson's book came out, which I never really understood until 2 years ago, when a man in our group who was also involved in DDT from World War II, he explained to me that because my dad had a PhD student at MSU with Dr. George, that's how my dad knew about the whole DDT thing before Carson's book came out. So that was interesting for me to in my personal history. But when back in '97, when EQ and EPA came back to St. Louis and did tests in the sediments of the river, I personally was against them doing anything in the river. In my thinking, the were in St. Louis above the dam, and I live downstream from St. Louis on the Pine River. I want them stirring up the sediments in town, because then they'd come on down and pollute the river down where I was. Well, at that first meeting that happened in October of '97, a community meeting, some that had been done showed that the DDT levels in animals down where I lived were very high, and were getting higher every time we did a study. There was more DDT buildup in the animals and the fish, of course. The fish, a lot of the fish just died when I did caged fish studies. They'd come back and the fish would all be dead. So that made me, okay, so we're already polluted. Well, then EPA about cleaning up bodies of water, rivers, with DDT contaminants, and the level of contaminants had to be before they would come in and do a cleanup. I remember the exact numbers, but what I remember is they said like 200 parts per million they would come in and do a cleanup. Well, they had already told us previously in the meeting that the acre area in the impoundment had 1,000 parts per million or more. So it to me that night that we needed a cleanup. They're going to just clean itself up with that amount of DDT. The reason it hadn't been cleaned up previously when they did the cleanup in 1982 is the state of Michigan, the federal government, let Velsicol leave town with cleaning up the river. And they also relied that the Velsicol Corporation people had given them, saying DDT contamination was in the river, and PBB, and about 5 other chemical contaminants. Well, of course, they to rely on Velsicol, but they didn't know that at the time. But they had gotten new technology, and they decided to come back in '97 because these studies of showed that the DDT levels were climbing. So then they found out how bad it was, and that night they suggested that maybe our community would want to form what's called an advisory group. We call it a CAG, C-A-G. And I signed up, and a bunch of other people, and so that's how we got our start. Then in January 8th, we actually incorporated ourselves and officers and everything. So we've been a busy group ever since. And I've been the group since, well, coming up on 6 years. And the previous chairman was, I think, maybe you've met him. Yeah. Yeah. So, and the core group, we've had people come and go. Core group, most of whom are on the executive committee, have been with us right from the start. There's one addition more recently. So the goal was to see the whole Pine River water cleaned up, because we not only had the contaminated sediments and the 52-acre Velsicol plant site that is hugely contaminated, but we had a place called Smith Farm, like, you know, Old McDonald, but it wasn't at all. It was a chemical, and that has a lot of vinyl chloride that's gotten in now. Plus we have what's called the Breckenridge, really sort of located out in the country between St. Louis, that has low-level radioactive dump that chemical, Michigan Chemical or Velsicol Chemical, and a host of other smaller sites that need to be cleaned up. So we didn't want to just on the Superfund site in St. Louis. We wanted it cleaned up. And so that's been our goal. And if, you know, after 10 years you'd like to think about that. But the river sediment, what they set up, they did an excellent job. And EPA and DEQ was the main ones that did the cleanup. They said they would clean up so that DDT was no more than 5% in the water, in the sediment. They cleaned it up so that it was almost non-detect it was non-detect in most places area that they cleaned up. So they did an excellent job. And we want the same kind of excellent job on the plant site. And this is what I'm concerned about right now, because they gave us, about a year ago, gave us their remedial investigation report. It's huge. I can show it to you. We have notebooks this thick, 11 of them all together. And how they talk about it, it's like they don't plan to do a thorough cleanup. They to put another wall around it, to put a cap over it. Good. Well, there's a number of problems with that, but probably already the chemical contaminants have gotten into the ground. They don't even know the extent of how far they've gone. One of the, which is a byproduct of the DDT manufacturing, called PCBSA, is in the St. water, and they've had to close down 2 of their wells, their drinking, and they're presently drilling in hopes that they can have clean water again. And the PCBSA EPA is a very it's a kind of chemical that, say it in the right terms, but essentially it moves faster than chemicals, and so it's kind of a precursor to what's coming. And St. Louis would love to talk with you about this, because he's very, you know, okay, so what if DDT goes up in the St. Louis drinking water? How quick would be a turnaround so that it's contained, so that St. Louis residents don't have bad drinking water? EPA cannot say. It would be years, at least 2 years, before they could contain it or do whatever. So anyway, I would talk with him about that.